Thank you for joining us and welcome to this change chat, which today is on leading change, drawing on psychology. So for those who don't know me, so I am Fraser Collins and I look after business development and partnerships here at Trueman Change, working very closely with Lucy and the team. So great to have you with us. A pleasure to be hosting today's session. For those who are maybe new to this and new to the chats or don't know Trueman Change that well, just very quickly and what we do. So essentially, we are specialist change management consultants, and essentially our work is about helping teams within local authorities, councils, public sector organisations feel equipped and supported through whatever change and transformation they are going through. So unlike most consultants who are kind of maybe more process and structure driven, we are another very important piece of that whole change and transformation consultancy jigsaw, in that we are very much people focused and psychology led. So we help leaders and councils and individuals understand the real human impact of change and how to engage staff meaningfully, because as we know, change isn't just logical, and Lucy will go into this in more detail, it's very much emotional. And with our expertise in organisational psychology and Lucy's in-depth expertise in that, and with the research we have and with the practical first-hand experience of supporting councils and public sector, we believe we're well placed to help you navigate, if you like, the people side of change. So on that note, today's change chat, we're going to look at all things change, including areas such as culture, behaviour, resistance to change, staff engagement, and we'll walk you through areas, or Lucy will certainly, such as why people resist change, what impacts things like motivation in the workforce, what good staff engagement really looks like, and subjects such as how to lead well during these uncertain times. Okay. So very quick bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Lucy. So we like these sessions to be really informal, try to make them as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put up your hand in the chat or unmute. Or if you want to put the question into the comments in the chat, then I'll certainly ask Lucy questions as we go along. We do record the sessions, so everybody who's booked on today will receive a copy of the recording. So if you have to jump off or whatever, then you want to catch up with it, you can do that. It'll be on our channels, our social media channels and YouTube page, etc. as well. So without further ado, Lucy, I'll hand over for you to introduce yourself. Very lucky to have you share your insight with us today. So Lucy is our founder and organisational psychologist and managing director of Trueman Change. Lucy, over to you.
Hi everyone. So as Fraser said, I'm Lucy. I'm the founder of Trueman Change, and I'm also an organisational psychologist. And through my career, I've worked around change and transformation in different ways. I started out much more project and programme management focused, started to draw more and more psychology in, and then went back to uni to do my master's in organisational psychology, because I really feel that there is a whole toolkit available to us there, which we can use when we're doing change and transformation. So in today's session, what I was going to do is just do a little bit of an intro as to where I think the gaps are at the moment in terms of how we do change and transformation. And then I'm going to share with you two specific models. So if you've been with us before on a change chat, the first bit where I'm talking about why psychology, you may have heard some of that before, but the two models we've talked about very briefly, but we've not gone into any depth before. And they are models specifically that look at how we respond to uncertainty, how we respond to risk and reward. And then the second model is really a bit of an explanation of why we suddenly feel overwhelmed with work, and how it's not always for the reasons that we think it is. So thank you very much for joining us. We mix these up, and sometimes we do just chats, sometimes we do panel discussions. I have done some slides for you today because as I said, I'm sharing a couple of quite technical models with you, so I thought it would be useful to have the slides. But please don't interpret this as because we've got slides, this is me just talking at everybody. As Fraser said, very happy to take questions. What I'm really passionate about is bringing the world of psychology into the workforce and into that applied real environment, because academically it can be a little bit removed. So if you want to ask about a specific situation in your organisation, you're very welcome to. If you want to put it in the chat directly to Fraser, if you want it to be anonymous, then that's fine too. But yeah, please do see this as it's an hour of time for you to get whatever you need from this session. So please don't feel like you can't speak up. So as I said before, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a potted history of change management and how it currently tends to be run in my experiences, predominantly local government, but also wider sector. So this may or may not apply as much in the private sector. I imagine it does, though, if I'm honest. And so this is how we got to where we are today in terms of how we do change. So we, at the moment, very much centre our approach to change and transformation around projects and programme management methodology, which is basically a structured, predictable way of getting stuff done. And it comes from the world of engineering. So if you've heard of Gantt charts, they are named after an engineer. Gantt was his surname, and it is PRINCE2, which is a very popular methodology. It stands for Projects in a Controlled Environment. So this is a methodology that was set up around making sure that we effectively manage our budgets, our milestones, our timescales. That was what this methodology was built for, and it's built on the assumption that you have to do things in a certain order and that order is predictable. Now, the reason why I'm sharing that is I do think we need projects and program management as a way of managing activity. You know, you do need to know what order you're doing stuff in, and particularly in the public sector where we are accountable for public money, we need to be able to plan things out. I'm not saying that it is a bad methodology at all, but where its weakness is people don't actually respond always in a predictable and structured way to change. So there is a gap here, that if we just use project and program management and we expect people to follow through a specific journey in a specific order, that's not really how our minds work in work or anywhere at all. So as people started to notice this gap, the kind of discipline of change management was invented, and this was more about making sure that we are engaging with people alongside that project and program management methodology. Now, the problem with change management as a profession is it was invented by consultants, and speaking as a consultant, what is in our best interest to do is to come up with a methodology and scale it up and apply it to lots of different organisations. So again, we're at a slight risk there of simplifying the process. And the other thing about change management is a lot of change management models are very much making an assumption of a sequential approach. So this is going to happen in this order. So you'll see this in John Cotter's approach to change, where there's 8 steps and they go in order. Now, I think that comes from basically the history of how we study things like management is about control. You know, but management has been seen as a mechanism for controlling resources. So we tend to like things that are very predictable and that we feel safe with, and it is about following a process. But again, that's not really how our minds always work. So a lot of organisations have taken this sort of methodology a bit further, and they've built PMOs, which is where you have a centralised team overseeing change and transformation. They are very positive in that they do allow you to make sure that you've got some resource at the back of this, and they give you some oversight of change going on, particularly in local government, which is what I tend to do a lot of work in. Change can be chaotic because you've got lots of different services doing lots of different change programs. So some real benefits to having a PMO from that perspective. However, if not done well, they can become a little bit gatekeepy. And if you look at the language used by PMOs, they often use terminology like gatekeeping. And if you're not careful, they can become almost the centralized reliance on them to do change. And the other thing that I think factors into this is that project management. So the definition of a project is something that has a beginning and an end. So by bringing in that sort of methodology, what we did, that combined with bringing in PMOs, we've sort of separated change from business as usual. And I think that we've got a bit of a gap at the moment in middle managers with their skills around change, because they will have often been trained in management as it being a predictive thing, as it being a control thing, and not necessarily had the same level of training around change leadership. And then when you add to that oh, well, we've got a PMO team that does change, and change is something that you have to sort of temporarily go through and then it's all fine again and you're back to normal. That isn't really how change is anymore. And when you look at even in the last 5 years alone, things like COVID, politics are very unstable at the moment, technology and the pace that it moves, I'm not sure there is such a thing anymore as business as usual. So you put all this together in a melting pot then with austerity, which, you know, for the last, I feel like I've been saying the last 10 years, for the last 5 years, so it's probably more like 15 now. But that creates a certain mindset around change. It creates a certain, you know, change is all about shrinking. It's not about growth. It's about shrinking. It's about, you know, tightening our belts. And that is a difficult narrative for people to swallow. So when you look at that, and I'm sorry if I've bored you a little bit, and I know we've not gotten to any psychology yet, when you look at that as a picture of how we do change, you can see why we're probably not setting ourselves up for success. And what you often see in organizations is they have invested money in things like PMOs, in change methodology, in training people up on projects and program management, but then they have a lot of stories of change programs or big transformation programs that kicked off, but then never really succeeded and never really landed. And they probably never landed because we didn't do that engagement piece with staff well, or they never landed because the landscape changed, the context changed. And because we are fixated on this kind of change is a thing that you go through and then it's back to normal, when in reality everything's changing all the time, it's really tough. It's a really tough thing to do. And I wanted to share with you one of the most popular change tools here that I'm sure many of you will have seen before, which is the change curve. For those of you that don't know, the research behind this, so this was driven by academic research rather than by consultancy, but the research came from how people responded when they were told that they were terminally ill. And we've sort of co-opted this and put it into the world of change management. Now, I think that in itself is a very interesting thing to do, because I'm not sure any of us would compare a change program with work with being told we were terminally ill. So there's quite a leap to bring that into that. Actually our most popular video on our website, even now it's still our most popular video, is a video about the change curve, which I made right at the start of lockdown, where I lost my dad to COVID on the 3rd of April 2020, so right at the start of lockdown. And I made a video about, actually this is the one time I will espouse using this, because at that point in time it was very challenging. But in reality, this is useful for helping us to understand that there is an emotional response to change. My experience is it looks much more like this. We don't go through that change curve in the right order. We bounce around it, and we sometimes bounce around it on the same day. Like, you know, you can get up feeling like pretty positive and in a problem solving mindset, and then something hits you and all of a sudden you're into confusion, and then you get annoyed with somebody, and then you think, actually maybe I need to calm down because I'm having a bad day, and then you go back into denial. And so you move around that. And for people on the call who are going through LGR, it's worth noting that, just using that as a specific example, even if we agree with the order of it and the flow of it, people will go through it at different times. So at the moment, those that are going through LGR, as in they're actually applying for it and going for business cases now, the bulk of the activity and the stress and the noise around this is probably with your CEOs and directors. It's probably not really hitting staff yet. So you can see why I critique this model, because we go through it in different orders anyway. And even if you agree, then we're probably going through it at different times. So if you're a leader in an organization going through change, and you've been involved in that change program right from the start, by the time you're coming out and into problem solving, your people could well be in that kind of dip of despair because they've not had the level of engagement or the level of autonomy. You know, we know what helps you get through this, and it is engagement, autonomy, feeling like you're good at your job, feeling like you've got a sense of direction. So even the change tools that we use, I think, are probably a little bit oversimplified. And I wanted to also just touch on, just because I've been speaking to a few people recently about communications and how we communicate change. The problem is that when we view change through this very, very kind of process approach, rather than understanding the human experience of it, it really impacts how we communicate change. And you will have all seen this. So when there's a change and transformation program going on, what you see is comms coming out, which are about the process rather than about what will actually be different. So you'll see, like, there'll be an intranet page and it'll be, right, well, we've had a board meeting and we've set up the transformation group and this has happened, this decision has happened. But we're not talking about the actual impact on what will be different. And it also creates a bit of a vibe where your communications around change are very top down and a one-way message rather than that engagement. And we know what helps people with change is talking about it, shaping it, being part of it, rather than just being told it's happened. So it creates this distance between the staff experience of change and these kind of big overall messages, and they just don't connect. And I think we're in a world right now where we have to accept that if you're going to be a leader in any sector, but particularly the public sector, where we have to throw in there, you know, politics and changes in demand, changes in society, change is a constant. So are we using, and I'm not saying we get rid of projects and program management, but if we rely solely on that, is that doing it justice? And I don't think it is. So I'm going to pause before I share a couple of psychology models because I can see there are some questions coming in, Fraser. I don't know if you want to field them or you want me to just answer them. Have we lost Fraser?
No,
Oh, no, you
I'm still here. Right, I was just looking through them there. Okay, so from Heather to ask you, Lucy, we also don't always start the change curve beginning. Can hop on at any stage depending on the change and what we feel about it. Something you would agree with, I'm sure.
Yeah, so no, we don't start it at the beginning. We can completely get involved at any stage and we can move backwards and forwards and we can skip steps. So the other thing that I really, really want to research that I haven't, I'm very focused on LGR at the moment because that's what my sector is very involved in. But when I've finished researching LGR, I really want to research change fatigue because that is a concept that would massively impact where you entered into that change curve on. Because if you're coming in at oh, you know, I'm happy, I'm pretty well adjusted and I'm happy with my work and okay, something's changing now, let's deal with that, compared to, okay, this is the 7th change program we've had that has done nothing, I feel disengaged, I'm sick of coping with uncertainty, that would massively impact where you entered that curve. However, the reason why I want to research it is I'm not sure it's a real thing, because if you won the lottery, nobody would be talking to you about change curve, when in actual fact, a lot of your life would change. So sorry, not change curve, change fatigue. So is change fatigue really just change, or is change fatigue as a result of overwhelm, too much uncertainty and things going wrong and a bad history of change? I don't know the answer to that, and that is why it is something that I would want to research. But yeah, you're right, that change curve is so contextual to where individuals are. It's why I think it's less useful than perhaps some people think it is. Where it is useful is we do have an emotional response to change, and there are a lot of managers out there that don't understand that just think that people will get on with it, and so I think it is useful for that.
Okay, good point, thanks. So it's right there. So from Shamshire, how is the psychology model received at the stage of selling services and engaging stakeholder into government organisation, which tends to be, on the face of it, process driven in their approach to doing business, including change management?
So it's mixed, and depending on who I'm talking to, like if I'm running a staff event, I don't talk about psychology because it's too scary. Like, and then people start telling me about the divorce. Like it's not what I'm here for. But what Where I think it's mixed in terms of the organisational approach, it depends on a level of maturity. So if people have never done change and transformation before, then actually that whole process-driven approach is really attractive because it feels safe. I have a plan. This is going to happen in this order. I can control this plan. That feels safe. Where I see the psychology landing better is with more experienced leaders who have been through that and seen it not succeed to the level that they want it to succeed. And they don't use words like psychology, but they use phrases like hearts and minds. We need to win hearts and minds. We need to engage with people because they've been through a program where on paper the plans were right and they followed it, but then it's just not landed. Really good example of this is buying IT and technology. I've seen a lot of organizations spend a lot of money on technology, do a decent plan, deliver that technology, and then they've just absolutely not got the benefits from it because they didn't do the change piece with staff to be able to change those hearts and minds and see that benefit. So yeah, it's very mixed. It's very mixed. And I find that people that have got a bit of change under the belt and realize what doesn't work can understand and see this gap and see, right, we're missing something, and what could that be?
Okay, great, thank you. That's all the questions just now, but please do keep them coming.
Okay, so why psychology? So work psychology or organizational psychology aims as a research field to answer these sorts of questions. And I think that all of these things are super relevant to when an organization is going through change. So in research, we look at things like how do we respond to uncertainty, to risk and reward? How does identity impact us and work? That's a really big deal for councils going through LGR because your sense of identity might be attached to a place. And if that is then being, merged into other places, that can impact us. Culture, there's a lot of really good research around culture. There's a person who called Edgar Schein, who a lot of work I really, really value of his, where he views culture as very much as messaging and artifacts and different levels. It looks at behaviour, it looks at how our minds work when we're in work, it looks at how we measure individual differences, which linking back to what we were talking about with the change curve. So individual differences just means how, yes, there might be ways in which our brains collectively tend to work and there's patterns, but we come as individuals and there are differences in how we approach things. Motivation is a really fascinating, massive field of research that's moved on quite a lot in the last kind of 30, 40 years as to what keeps people motivated at work, what keeps people engaged at work. And another newer field in terms of sort of 50 years ago, people weren't even talking about it, but work-related stress and well-being. Again, that is often impacted by change because if you've got all those different emotions that you're going through, that can impact your sense of your stress levels. And stress has only really in the last couple of decades become something that organisations are starting to take responsibility for. And how we make decisions is another fascinating one. And I might do a change chat specifically on that because there's lots of different forms of bias. It turns out we're pretty rubbish at making decisions. And we really like to think we're not, but we are bringing all sorts of bias with us. And that's why things like data is really important. We get decision fatigue if you are making too many, and that can impact even decisions as silly as what you're having for your tea. We'll have all had days where we've had a busy day and we've had to decide a lot. Making decisions takes up more of your cognitive energy than not making decisions, and you get home and can't be bothered to figure out what to have for your tea because you're so tired. That is decision fatigue. So things like groupthink, there's all sorts of impacts. That's a really fascinating field of study. And if you think about team dynamics, that's again another fascinating field of study where what happens to a team when they're going through change. We'll have all worked in teams that are really positive, and we'll have all worked in teams where something's not clicking or something's toxic and something's not working. So all this field of research, if you start to bring this thinking into change, it skills you up to be able to really engage with people with a different toolkit other than just a plan or a change curve. And I personally think it's really powerful. And this is on my mind at the moment, probably because, as I said earlier, I did lose my dad to COVID, and the COVID inquiry, I was part of the group that I was involved very early on in the Families for Justice. I chose to step away from it because, from a grieving point of view, like, you've got to get that balance right, haven't you, between loss and anger and so on. But the COVID inquiry that's recently come out, and it's only the second module, and there's quite a lot of modules, so they've not brought anything out yet about health or care or procurement. So there's a lot still to come. But the most recent module was specifically around the government and governance. And these were some of the findings that, there was this lack of information, there was a lack of urgency, which resulted in making decisions too late, which resulted in lives being lost, poor communications, and it does specifically reference a lack of trust between different areas of the government. Now, for those of you that work in the public sector and that were working during this time, won't be surprised by any of these findings. But what I wanted to point out was, really, apart from the first one, the rest of them are all psychological. They're all things to do with how our minds work, how we perceive whether something's urgent or not, how we make our decisions, how we communicate with people, and trust. There's so much out there about psychological safety and trust in the workplace. So even when things are on that massive, massive scale where things are as much of a crisis as there was, a lot of what goes wrong still boils down to how our minds work. And equally, a lot of what goes right still boils down to how our minds work. When they research high-performing teams, they can relate it back to psychological safety. So this is a whole field of research that's available to us that I think we're just not using enough at the moment. And in terms of how our brains work during organisational change, because that's, as we said, it's not necessarily a business as usual situation. What happens is the ante ups, so our psychological needs up. So there's just a few things on this slide that we know that our brains really need when we're working, but also when we're going through change, they'll be amplified. So we need a sense of autonomy, which is why we are at risk with this top-down process-driven approach of taking that sense of autonomy away from people. Now, I know it's not always possible to do that, because very often we're making changes that we don't particularly want to make. Those of you that are going through LGR probably have your own personal views on whether that is a good idea or not. And that is a really good example of a government-driven agenda where that sense of autonomy has been removed, even from chief execs of council. But you have to find a sense of autonomy for people when they're going through change. So even if you can't give them autonomy about what the change is, you can give people autonomy about how that change happens and how you will engage with them through the process. So always bear in mind, people need a sense of autonomy. We know that relationships matter hugely, and we know this. And to be fair, a lot of organisational psychology, it's kind of Captain Obvious stuff. You will recognise it. And I'm sure all of you on this call have been through experiences where you've had good working relationships with your colleagues and bad working relationships with your colleagues. Our relationships matter hugely. And again, sometimes the way that we do change is at risk of damaging them, because sometimes we're putting people in a competitive environment. So we know that people join an organisation, but they leave a manager. So protect those relationships and be mindful of those relationships. We know that culture is absolutely crucial. You can do the best project plan in a world. If it does not align with the culture of your organisation, it will not succeed. So I am going to do a future session in the new year specifically on culture, because there's a lot of research available to us in that area, and there's lots of different ways of looking at culture. But again, a very popular saying is culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it is true. So if you're trying to change an organisation and you're not giving thought to how you might need to change the culture in line with the changes you're trying to make, then your change won't land. You have to do the culture work as well. And different people are motivated by different things. So we're going to talk about this shortly. We're going to talk specifically about how we respond to risk and reward and how that impacts our motivation. But it is worth saying that, not everybody will be on board with a change for the same reason. My first job in local government was in a children's services, but not social care. It was in education. And I don't have children, never wanted children. actually jokingly said a phrase this morning when he said his little boy is struggling with a change thing. Well, I thought to him, like, I'm not good at children, I'm good at feral cats. And I worked in children's services, and their whole thing was about how we make children's lives better. And my personal driver at that point, because I was a finance and business manager, was how do we make this service perform better? Now, yes, the outcome of that was that it made children's lives better, but you can see how if you're pummeling a message, it needs to be tailorable because different people are motivated by different things. So any questions before I go into the first model? Do feel free to unmute or put in the chat if you've got any questions or comments so far. Okay, so I'm going to share two models with you today. So the first one I have spoke about briefly before, but I have not gone into any great depth. It is called Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory, which is quite a technical name. So we refer to it as cats and cheese. And the reason we call it cats and cheese is because it is based on research that was originally started with rats and mice. And what they wanted, the question they wanted to answer was, are they motivated differently by the scent of threat, which is cats, or the scent of cheese, which is reward? And the conclusion that they came to was that there were individual differences between rats and mice. So some were very motivated by the smell of a cat, some less so, some more motivated by the smell of cheese. And this translates into humans. So there are profiling tools which you can do where you can discover your own sensitivity here. You don't possibly need them 100% because you'll probably recognize it. So for example, if you're going house shopping, so at the time when I learned about this theory, I was house shopping, and if you're focusing on whether it's got a nice kitchen, whether it's got a nice garden, you're focusing on the cheese. If you're focusing on whether it's in a flood risk area or whether it's in an area of high crime, then you're probably focusing on cats. And there's no right or wrong in this, and you will see it in your colleagues, you'll see it in family members. In a team environment, you want a good mix. But where you also might see it is in organisations. So some organisations culturally are very risk averse, and some organisations culturally are bordering reckless. So even at a cultural level, this can swing. And I always think it's fascinating that probably certain professions attract certain preferences. So, you know, if you are, for example, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm very motivated by both, which means I'm an emotional mess because I'm always chasing something exciting but scared it will go wrong. Equally, if somebody is in, say, procurement as a profession in local government or public sector, their job is actually about mitigating cats. It's actually about making sure that we don't break the law. It's about making sure that we're safe. If you look at children's social care, you've probably attracted people that are wanting to make children's lives better, because why the hell else would you do that job? That's an incredibly difficult job. You're probably highly motivated to want to make children's lives better, but you're in an extremely high risk environment. So your job there is making sure that you're navigating cats all the time. So you can see how this model plays out in different ways at different levels, whether it's a personal level, whether it's a team level, or whether it's an organizational level. And when you're looking at this, so this is a slide by a company called Mindflick, who are the company that do the ratings, you know, the profile, if you want to get profile and understand your own approach. And the way that they describe this is a mindset. So it's not necessarily a fixed personality trait. So there's a lot of research done around personality traits that do tend to be more fixed. And they are talking about things like openness, about things like neuroticism, things that are quite deeply embedded. This is a mindset. So it is possible to change your mindset around these issues. And it's actually very powerful to view this as a map for when you are making decisions or when you are navigating something, to put yourself in these different mindsets. But these are the 4 mindsets. So if you are particularly motivated by cheese and not particularly motivated by cats, then you will be optimistic. So that means hang on, let me press this. No, because I'm still starting on the wrong side because this is an animated slide. We'll start with contained. So contained people are the envy of me. They're the opposite to me. I wish I could be more contained. Contained people are actually not very motivated by cats or cheese. So they are the people that are really good at staying the course. So what you might experience with those people is they might come across as a bit resistant to change, but also they're very good at creating a sense of stability in an organization. If you are very motivated by cheese, but not very motivated by cats, then you are chasing stuff and you're chasing things from a positive place. So where you'll see these people in a change program is, oh, I get it. I get the vision. I can see what we're trying to do here. This is exciting. This is an opportunity. So if we relate it to LGR, just because I know that's what a lot of people are going through, these are your people that are like, well, hang on, I could end up with a bigger job out of this. I could end up with more responsibility. I could end up shaping something new. This is really exciting. Your prudent people are seeing all of the cats but none of the cheese. So in a change program, they would be saying, yes, but what if? What if our service doesn't deliver because of this new system we're bringing in? What if we don't meet our statutory responsibilities? What if everybody just leaves because they don't like it anymore? So these are often seen as negative people, and they can behave in a way that is negative, but the actual mindset of being prudent is not a negative thing at all. And you can see how when I say in a team environment, you would want to have all of these skills. And then finally, you've got what I am, which is both. So very emotionally erratic. I feel like I'm doing myself down a little bit here, but somebody that is always going for something, but is also quite scared that it's going to go wrong. So this person is very much on high alert. They are looking for threats. They're looking for cats and for cheese all the time. So a lot of entrepreneurs tend to fall into this because, they, by its nature, you're going to be chasing something, but also it's quite an insecure lifestyle being self-employed. So you do have to look for the cats. So where this is helpful is you can consciously choose to change your mindset with this. So you don't have to be in your fixed one. You can decide. My computer's just crashed. Are you all still with me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just crashed.
Still here.
It's okay. It's coming back. Let me get back to where I was. So it's a great tool for understanding change behavior during change. So what happens is when something is going to be won or lost, these behaviors amplify. So if you're a cheese person, you're happily going through life, looking for your cheese, and then all of a sudden there's a change coming, you see even more cheese, it amplifies. If you are the same but looking for cats, then there's more cats, so that behavior becomes amplified. So it's a great way of understanding why behavior happens in a way that it happens during change. It's also a really great tool for yourself to use individually when you are making decisions or when you are coping with change or when you've got a lot on, where you can say to yourself, okay, so if my mindset right now was this one, how would I feel? What would I be looking for? How would I act? And do that for all four. It's a bit like Edward de Bono's thinking hats. It puts you in different perspectives, so it will help you to think that through. And also, it's worthwhile to think about your communications if you're going through a change program, because where conflict arises between these types of people is if you are a cats person, you can't hear the cheese, you can't see the cheese, you can't smell the cheese does not exist to you. So when a cheese person is communicating to you and you're saying, yeah, but what if this happens and what if that happens? And they're saying, but think of the opportunities, like it's not going in. And I think what we're sometimes guilty of in change and transformation communications is focusing 100% on the cheese, and we're not allaying the fears of the cats people. So when you are communicating and engaging with others, it's really powerful to be able to put yourself in these mindsets and think about how these messages would land. So you can see this isn't a replacement for project and program management methodology at all. We still need those methodologies. But if you as a change leader are starting to understand, oh, it's not just a simple change curve where people are going to go through it in this order, and you start to identify individual behaviors and think, okay, how do we communicate with this person? How do we communicate as a whole? How do I put myself in these different mindsets? You can see how you'll get a much richer experience of change. So any questions or comments on that one before I move on to the next one? We can do a whole day on cats and cheese, so we have rushed through that very quickly. But yeah, if there's any comments, I'm happy to take them. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Nothing just now. Yeah, William, really like this model. Yeah, it's a really useful model. We use it a lot, don't we, Lucy?
We do. Okay, so I'm just super conscious of time. So the second model I want to share with you is one called Jobs Demands Resources. Now, this isn't particularly about change, but I use this in change a lot when I'm working with people who are struggling. So basically, it's, again, very captain obvious, very kind of instinctive. It will land. It might look a bit complicated, but it will land for you. So when we go to work, we have two buckets. We've got the demands that the work takes from us. We're tired at the end of it. And we've got the resources that are available to us. And it's quite a transactional thing. So if you think about it, some people call it like how many spoons you've got for the day. You could call it what your cup of water is for the day. So you turn up for work and your water is filled up by things like whether you've got good relationships with your colleagues or not, whether you've got that sense of autonomy, have you had some good training, have you got somebody to give you a bit of coaching, how's your personal resilience, like that's what fills your cup up. What drains your cup is the demands from the workplace. Now that is part of the deal. You know, you're giving your time and you're giving your energy, and that is part of the deal, that it is going to tire you out. But the reason why this theory is interesting is because different things tire us out for different reasons in different ways. And my observation, and I noticed this particularly in housing because I did a comparison between housing and other public sector services, but it is true for all across the public sector. It's just in different ways in different parts of it. We are very guilty of only considering demands to be a workload issue. We like to count widgets. How many social care cases have you got? How many phone calls have you answered? How many meetings have you got? How many emails have you sent? We like to count widgets. But in reality, if you look at the demands part of this diagram, that is only one of the types of demands. And in some parts, well, in all parts of the public sector, you'll have a mixture of these demands, but some parts are more mature to this concept than others. They might not use this language, but for example, if you are a children's social worker, then you have an understanding of those emotional demands, and you have in your resources, you've probably experienced as part of your degree before you even started working, you've probably learned a little bit about boundaries and about the impact that this job is going to have on you emotionally. You've probably got some supervision in place. Nationally, we have a body of Ofsted that is, kind of regulating this area. They look at supervision. So we've acknowledged that in that particular area, emotional demands are high. When you compare that to, for example, housing officers in housing, they don't have any of that training. They don't have that supervision in place. And yet they're very often dealing with the same families that the social workers are dealing with. So the reason why I've included this is because it's a plea for you to think about when you are changing and you're redesigning jobs and you're redesigning services, don't just count the widgets. You also need to think about what are the emotional demands on that job? Are they dealing with emotional things? And is that going to take things out of them? So where you notice this is when people are saying, well, we've counted our workload, but we're really stressed, we're really overwhelmed. And when you look at the numbers, it doesn't quite make sense. It might be because they're overwhelmed with a different type of demand. Now, emotional is just one of them. Another one can be physical. If you're a hairdresser, your feet and your back are going to hurt at the end of the day. And if you sat at a desk all day, then it might be that your back's hurting for different reasons. But there are physical demands to some jobs, and they don't necessarily always have to be stereotypical physical jobs either. There are cognitive demands. So we touched on a little bit earlier that certain things drain our cognitive. If you imagine, again, your brain's only got a certain level of certain size cup in it. Things like making decisions really drains your cognitive stuff. Things like having to set strategy, having to be proactive, having to think, do deep work. There's a whole load of research around the difference between turning up, being busy, answering emails, but not being very deep, and being in deep flow. We can actually only be in deep flow unless you're like an academic that's used to it. They recommend sort of 25 minutes to an hour at a time of real deep work. So that is another way that it drains from you. Social demands can drain from you. So again, if you were to compare like somebody, a hairdresser spends a lot of their time actually talking to their clients about nothing to do with hair. So there is a social demand there in terms of that's draining your battery as well. And organisational demands. So very often we have bureaucratic demands, and I don't mean that as a negative thing, because there's a necessity for some of it, but that is not perceived in the same way as work. So even sometimes keeping on top of your emails and keeping on top of certain things that you've got to get done, whether it's typing up your casework notes or whatever. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I worry that we do a lot of change and transformation, and we talk a lot about people's stress, about their sense of overwhelm, and we're not always understanding why that is. We're often just counting the widgets. Well, you've done this much work today. And I really feel like this is an area that we're a little bit weak at the moment. And whether that's I'm working with a leadership team at the moment in a council to look at their cognitive demand is very much coming from a place of firefighting, so they're not able to get into that proactive space. I've worked with people in housing who are really struggling with that emotional demands because they're having to do the work and not necessarily making the space for that, how they process those emotions from the workplace. So there's lots of different examples, and it will be very specific to the change that you're working with. But yeah, it's a useful psychology tool for when people are resisting and when they are overwhelmed and they're saying we can't do this change, we can't do any more. These are some of the reasons that might be under the surface as to why. So it's a great tool for if you are doing restructures, you're redesigning jobs. It's a great tool for if you are thinking about how people are responding and whether they're responding in a way that seems disproportionate because they seem more overwhelmed than they should be. It could be because of these different types of demands. But that is just two topics, and they are just two individual bits of research around two topics. You know, the list is endless, and this is where I really feel like if we can start to bring some more of this into the way that we do change, we will do change much better as a result. So as I said earlier, you know, some of the tools that you can rely on for psychology or take some of the learning is around job satisfaction, how we do leadership, motivation, team dynamics, uncertainty. There's lots and lots of really good stuff out there. But in terms for practical tips, because I know this has been a bit of a geeky psychology, share a couple of geeky models with you. If you are going through change at the moment, these are the tips that I would give you as a change leader. First of all, know your culture, because you have to understand how your culture is going to respond, and you have to be able to predict that, and you have to be consciously shaping the culture, not being a victim to it. The second is design and tailor both your approach and your comms. So don't just do a sequential plan. Actually really think about how things land and think about how you can tailor your approach and make sure that you're not just following a fixed methodology, because there isn't a single fixed methodology out there that will do this for you. You have to have a toolbox and pull different things in at different times. You have to pay attention to your people's concerns, because it's easy for us to dismiss concerns, but you can start to build that skill where you look at somebody and you can start to see through the language that they're using and be like, right, is this because they're a cats person or a cheese person? Are they talking about workload, or are they talking about emotional demands or social demands? It enables you to start to analyze what people are worried about, and then you can fix that deeper problem as you're going through change. And the fourth thing I would say is to skill up your leaders, because we don't have enough leaders that are skilled in these types of ways of thinking and these models. We have a lot of leaders who are skilled up in how to follow a process, in how to manage something, in how to deliver a project. But in terms of really understanding how people's minds work in work, I think that we have a real gap there in a lot of organizations. But I would also say, you know, have a good toolbox, because to someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you are fixed on one methodology and one way of doing change, then you will not be doing yourself service, because what you're doing there is you're looking for things because of your confirmation bias that you can just keep hammering with that particular toolkit. So think about your own development and how you can draw on the world of psychology, of change, of project management. You know, you do still need to know that stuff, and even things like politics and comms and PR and what do we do when we need to influence people. There's lots of professions out there that have lots of interesting stuff that we can pick up and learn and bring into our own toolbox. So what's next for us at Trueman Change? So we do run these free change chats on a regular basis. We have got our next one, which Fraser will drop in the chat, which is in December, that is specifically about LGR. And then my job over Christmas is to design the programme for next year. So please do pop in the chat if there are any specific topics that you think that we should cover on a future change chat, then please do let me know. We're currently developing a methodology for how you can incorporate psychology into how we do change, and we're looking for organisations to test that in. So if you are one of these organisations that has a PMO, that has like that project and programme management approach, but you feel like something is missing, then we'd really love to talk to you. And we're also currently researching the impact of LGR on people. So we do need interviewees. So if you've been through it, going through it, and you're happy to contribute to that research, we've got quite a few clients at the moment that we're working with on different ends of the spectrum. Some people that are only just starting to go through it, some people that have got their decision and their implementation, and we're working with a council that has been through it and is now looking at that cultural integration. So if you can support with that process, then we'd very much appreciate it. And that is everything from me. Fraser, I don't know if there's any more questions or anything else that anybody wants to ask before we close up.
No more questions here. And if anybody has, though, please do feel free to ask in the few minutes we have left. Yes, we'll share the link to the recording. I will do that after we've just finished. I'll also send a follow-up email. I look after business development, so remiss of me not to mention that a lot of these change chats and people from these chats turn into clients for us at Trueman Change, and it's a catalyst for further conversations. So please feel free to reach out to myself or Lucy if you'd like to have a discussion with us, to go into a bit more detail on what we're doing with other councils just now, whether LGR or non-LGR. We'd love to have that discussion with you. And please do join us on the next chat. I've put the link in the chat just now. That's on the 12th of December, and again, more tailored towards LGR, which is very topical. But I hope you've all had some good takeaways. It was all really interesting stuff, Lucy. Thank you for sharing that. And we just look forward to seeing you again on the next one soon, hopefully.
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we've just got a couple of things coming. So Sue, can we have a chat about? Yes, we absolutely can, Sue. I know we're working with you at the moment already anyway, so yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Do you have any tips for how you influence culture while going through a large transformation program? Oh my goodness, we could do a whole hour on this at least. How do you, so in terms of how do you influence culture? So culture is, I define culture as it's how messages move around the organization, Monica. So what I'd be looking for if I was going through a large change and transformation program is, where are we inadvertently sending messages that it contradict the change that we're trying to see? So we can have a follow-up conversation if you want to be a little bit more specific, and then I can give you some examples. But basically, we send messages through our behaviour, through our systems, the way that we make decisions, and some examples of where we contradict ourselves is I worked with a council who wanted to get their middle manager level to be much more collegiate, collaborative, and less empire building. But when we looked at the symbols around that, actually they were all having, directorate meetings where they didn't invite anybody that wasn't in their own team. So find those contradictions is what I would say, first of all. And then how do you ensure you're moving people towards new ways of working? Again, it's the same. It's the find the contradictions, find the symbols that keep people in that old way of working, and they will be how you communicate, there'll be your leadership behavior, there'll be a real mixture. But if you want to have, Fraser will reach out, and if you want to have a quick 20 minutes with me to just talk through in a bit more detail, I'm more than happy to do that, because it's quite a big question to answer. We've probably got actually a video specifically about culture. I'll see if I can dig it out for you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'll send you a message, Monica. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, listen, everyone, enjoy your rest of your Friday and your weekend. Any questions or anything at all, please just reach out to us, and we hope to see you again soon.